Hey crew, welcome to the next installment of our basement bar build video. As always, if you would hit those like and subscribe buttons, help me keep fresh content coming to you. Be safe and enjoy.
We're at the point now, we got our floor repairs done. We want to go ahead and get this wall set. So I want to go ahead and measure out, get it nice and square to this wall here, make sure we have a square corner here. We'll get it tacked in here, up top of our framing, and we'll use the ram sets to get this anchored in on the bottom. A little later in our project, when I'm ready to do some more concrete drilling, I'll actually go ahead and throw some Tapcons or sleeve anchors in each of these walls, as well as in our bar when we frame that out. They're all going to have significant weight on them, so I want to use something a little more substantial than the ram set. You saw earlier when we were doing our floor repair with that ram set that we took out, they work good. They're a good concrete anchor, but they don't have a whole lot of depth. So they're good at giving you a securing force when it's going lateral, but I want something a little more substantial. So I'll show you those anchors in a little bit. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and move forward on this wall. You'll notice here, you may not be able to see on camera, this is just a single stud. So what I want to do is I want to take another stud, I already got it trimmed into place, and we're going to tack that in there and make this a double. I want to make sure there's something really substantial in here. Like we said, there's probably going to be a lot of weight on this with an epoxy backsplash, or even just the shelves holding up the things that bars hold up. Beer, liquor, all that stuff. So we'll get that in there, we'll get everything nice and perpendicular. I'll set the laser line, we'll get our wall set. I'll show you how I fire in a few ram sets, and we'll move on from there. But at this point in the video, I don't really think we've talked too much about framing, or at all about framing, and how to properly do that. I'm not going to show you how to do a wall right now, because we already have this one behind me built. I'll probably do that a little bit later when we do the closet. But one thing I do want to talk about is the crown on the boards. If you look at a 2x4, it's never going to be completely straight, especially this dimensional lumber. It's always got warps and curves in it. And it has what's known as the crown. So I'm exaggerating this, but this 2x4, if you look at it real close, it's not perfectly straight up and down. If I put a straight edge, if I put my level on this board's not too bad. But I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up. I'll see if I can zoom in on editing. There's a little bit of a bow in that board. It's not perfectly straight. So when the board is curved like that, that's what's called the crown in the board. And you always want to match up the crown. So when we talk about marking our crowns, all right, and again, I'm exaggerating this, but this board is curving like this. The same way I have the board standing up, it's the same arc and motion I'm doing my hand in. This middle portion is the part that bows out. So that's the part that I always mark on my crown. I do it the same way every time. That way when I'm doing my walls, I always know the part that I mark with an X has the crown, so where it's bowing out. And then when I do my walls, I will always put that bowed section going towards the back. And the reason for that is now when we sheetrock this, if we're doing like a TV or we're putting shelves and things on, I would rather have it so that that bowed section is facing towards the back. It just makes things a little bit neater, and it helps things sit more flush with the wall. Picture mounting a TV. If this is curved like this, we can kind of get the TV into that curve. If it's going the other way, well, now that whatever you're mounting, whether it be a TV, a shelf, a mirror, that can actually rock a little bit. So generally I'll put my crown towards the back of the wall. On this one here, I want to match the crowns. Whenever you're doing this and you're adding in framing, or in this case here, we're doubling up the stud, we want to make sure the crowns are going the same way. They're never going to match perfect because they're going to be different boards, they're going to have different variations over time. But if you reverse those, you're actually going to make this a wider gap. So it doesn't really matter here because we're just going to sheetrock over it anyway. But if this was something that we were maybe doing like a door frame on, your wall, once you sheetrock that, will actually be wider than what your door frame is. So you want to try to avoid that. So I'm just going to take a step back and see if I can tell which way the crown goes based off of this wall. So in this case here, the crown is actually not very pronounced. If we look here, again, I don't know if the camera is going to show this or not, but we have a little bit of space here. So it's tight to the level up here and down there. We have a gap here, which means my bow is going that way. I'm just going to mark on here, crown facing that way, and we'll match those up. nice square, line it up with the wall right here, line it up on our other stud. So I'm going to line it with the sole plate down here and the stud right here. And I'll get my laser line and we'll get that right across. A couple different ways you can do this. You can use a pencil, you can draw it out. If I'm doing a lot of walls and they're going to be a long distance, usually I'll use a chalk line. That looks pretty good. We'll check it when we get down here too. I'll get this edge nailed in and then I'll use the square again down here. We'll make sure this is a good square corner and sweep up before I nail it in. Alright, so I have my bottom edge both right on the laser line and flush with the other stud. So I'm just going to put one nail on the bottom just to hold that for now. Then we'll get more later. Since we have the nail gun out, we'll just check that for plumb. We can nail that in right now. Okay, so you probably saw I had some squaring issues there. What happened was, when I set that wall up, I made it square to the pre-existing wall to join to. I did the same thing over here. The problem is, this wall and that wall are not perfectly square to each other. A little bit, you know, 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch off, not that big of a deal, that's within tolerance. But when you have a little bit here and a little bit here, it equates to a lot of it in that corner there, which I don't want. That's going to be the corner of the bar, that's going to be one of the focal points. So what I did was I adjusted everything to make it so that that corner is square. And you probably saw me do the final check. I put the level up here, and we were about 1/16 of an inch off. So that's very well within tolerance. In order to go ahead and secure the sole plate to the concrete floor, I'm going to go ahead and use what's called a ram set. We talked a little bit about this before, unless I took it out of the video for some reason. So here we have our ram set anchor. This one in particular is galvanized, because we have the pressure treated lumber because it's making contact with the concrete. So for that we need a galvanized fastener. So we just open up our tool here, and this sets in the bottom, and it's got that plastic retaining ring on it, so it just holds in there. It's almost like anyone who's familiar with guns, this is same concept. We kind of open up our action here, and here we have what's called a 22 blank cartridge. It's made by Ramset specifically for this. Do not put an actual 22 bullet in that one, trust me. So it's going to go right there in the little firing chamber, and then we're going to close this, and in order for this to actually fire, you have to be pushing down on this and have pressure, and that engages the firing mechanism, and then it's the old firing the whole thing, pull the trigger, and it pops. And then that actually creates a explosion, fires this through the wood into the concrete. Obviously use caution on this. Make sure you read all the safety disclaimers, labels, all that. Make sure you're using eye protection and ear protection, because this bad boy is loud, especially in an enclosed space. So that's all there is to that. You can see it's pretty simple. Now normally if I was doing, let's say, a perimeter wall, going around the foundation up against the insulation, I would hit that in every stud cavity. So we talked earlier that they don't really go incredibly deep, but they are good for that lateral side-to-side securing. But in this case here, there's potentially going to be a lot of weight on these. I want something more substantial to anchor them in, so I'm going to do concrete anchors in the cavities as we progress here. I just have that in there now to maintain our square. We'll get the top in, we'll get everything nice and plumb, do more concrete anchors later. So now that we have our bottom in, I hesitate to use the easy word, so whenever you say something's easy, it ends up being not. all we have to do is get our level on here. This board's pretty warped, I'm going to do a different one. Rock that to where it's plumb. I already have my screws started here, so I'm just going to fire those on in. So let's talk about the 3-4-5 rule in carpentry really quick. This is very useful for when you want to determine if a corner is square. I do have another video on this that I use some better examples for and go a little more in depth. I'll link that up above. But for right now, I just have my quick diagrams that I drew on the floor here. So we have a triangle, or an imaginary triangle. So we have our corner that we hope is a right angle. And we have side 1, side 2, and we have our hypotenuse. Generally, that's an imaginary hypotenuse. And for those going back to grade school math, the hypotenuse is the longest side in the triangle. So if we have side 1, that's 3 inches. Side 2, that's marked at 4 inches. You see I have my hash marks right here. In theory, that distance between the two, the hypotenuse, should be 5 inches. That's a really good way for determining if a corner is actually square. So I mark these out. If we measure these out, side 1 is 3, side 2 is 4, that hypotenuse should read 5, which we're pretty, I don't know if the camera's showing that, but we're pretty darn close there. Should be close because I drew these with the framing square and they're right on. So we're not limited to that 3, 4, 5. We can extrapolate that out. So we can take our 3, 4, 5. You know, this is a small example right here. There's a lot of room for error right there. If we're off just a 1/16 of an inch on this, that could be 16 inches if we're talking 20 feet in a triangle that we're trying to do. So we can do this in inches, 3, 4, 5 inches. We can do that in feet. This can be 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. And I'll show you an example of that in a little bit. We can extend those numbers out. So we're not limited to just this 3, 4, 5. We can double these numbers. So if you see this example here, we doubled the numbers. 6, 8, 10. The ratios are still the same. As long as you multiply these the same, you're good to go. You can take that by 3s, 5s, 20s. As long as you have that same multiple on 3, 4, 5, you're good. We can extend this out. I don't want to get too much into the math here and confuse you. This is just a quick example. But as long as we're multiplying these numbers by the same and keeping that same ratio between them, we're good to go. So let's say we're talking about feet right here. We have 3, 4, 5 feet. Maybe we're building a deck, maybe we're building a loft, and we have distances of 16, 20 feet that we want to try and cover. We want to try and get as far of a distance as we can to make that the most accurate. So let's say we had this side here and we know that we can get 15 feet measurement on it. So we'll just take that and multiply the 3 by 5 and we'll have 15. Same thing if you multiply the 4 by 5, that is going to give us 20. And then 5 times 5 is 25. So we would take that to 15 feet, 20 feet, and then the measurements between those should be 25 feet. Hope that makes sense, and I'll show you an example where I just used that in a few minutes. Some of the things I like to highlight in my videos is that things don't always go as planned. In fact, they usually don't, and if things are going as planned, either A, it's a gift, or B, something is going wrong and you just don't notice it. So when I started framing this wall, I moved from an old batch of wood into a new batch of 2x4s. And I had some pretty significant splitting issues. I thought maybe it was just the one piece of wood. I went to a couple others. And every one, when I started firing the framing nails into, it was splitting the wood. Something fierce. I really had actually never seen it that bad. Tried playing with the adjustment settings and the pressure on the nail gun. Wasn't really affecting everything. Tried going the old school way, tried hammering in by hand. Still wasn't affecting things. So I went into my old batch. I still had some scraps left and wasn't having that problem. That happens every now and again with a batch of wood. It seems to be happening more and more in the industry. With supply chain issues, there's just more and more of a demand to push things out faster. So, haste equals waste, and that sacrifices the quality of the wood. So when this is cut at the sawmill, goes for processing, goes for finishing, it's dried in something called a kiln, and it's almost like a big furnace that dries out the wood and gets it ready for final preparation. If that kiln process isn't done right, or if it's rushed, it's going to affect the final dryness and the final brittleness of the wood. I have an example here each of the bad lot and the good lot of wood. I'm going to fire a few nails in each, and hopefully we can replicate what's going on for the camera. So I'll start in the center and I'll fire a few, and then we'll move to the edges, kind of like how we were if we were actually doing framing, and what I ran into here with firing nails at the edges and having it split, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So as you can, I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up or not, but we had a nail right in the middle of the board, and it's got to split right down the middle. That's not okay, that's not supposed to happen. And feeling these nails go in, there's significant kickback on the gun. This wood itself just seems too hard. So like I said, I'm not a wood kiln drying expert, but knowing a thing or two about carpentry, it just seems like this was dried too fast, and therefore it just made the wood too hard and too dry to work with. So we'll do another one. Do one more nail kind of in the center, and I'll do two on the edges so you can see what I'm talking about. So you can see right here, all of these, for that matter, I got my pressure turned up pretty high, and it's not even fully setting the nail. So that leads me to believe just the content of the wood is not what it's supposed to be. Alright, so we got two nails on the edges here, and you can see that it split both of them. And if I show you the side profile, it shows it a lot better. Again, that's not supposed to happen. Something is wrong with the drying process of this wood, and it doesn't have the final hardness or final density that it should. And even, you can see when I'm firing the nails, my framing nailer had a significant kickback. It's not supposed to happen. See, two more, split them both. Now this piece right here is from a lot that I know to be good, that I did the wall behind me with. I don't think I had any splits. So again, we'll start in the center. So even on that, if you can see my nails, underneath this, just as a backstop, I had used one of the ones that I'm calling the bad lot. And they fired through my top piece that I know to be good just fine, but the bottom piece, they stopped and they bent right over. Right, let's try that again. Now that the compressor's done, you can see all these nails that I fired in here. Not one of them split the wood. We have a little bit of splitting on the edges, but for the most part the wood is intact all throughout. I mean, that's probably what, about 15-20 nails, one right after the other in there. So clearly, problem with the lot of wood. So that brings us to our issue at hand right now with kind of finishing up this wall behind me. I want to get that done. I want to move on with the rest of the project. I can't use my framing nailer or traditional hammer and nail because every time I do that it splits. Yes, for the sake of getting this done, do I have scraps from the good lot that I could use and pop right on there? Absolutely, and if this was not a YouTube video, I would. But I want to go ahead and give you an example of what you could do is if all you had was this bad lot of wood. If this was new framing on a brand new construction house, I wouldn't do this because I'd want that to be as strong as possible. But here we're talking about a basement remodel. None of these walls are going to be load bearing. At the most they're going to maybe hold a few shelves, pictures, something like that. more than sufficient for that. For the most part, their purpose is to hold the drywall in place and make sure that's secure. So we have a little bit of wiggle room for structural integrity. So in this case, what I'm going to do, I could use screws. I could go ahead and pre-drill, countersink a screw hole and put one there. The problem with screws, and I build with them all the time, I love them, but they don't have the shear strength that a nail does. A nail is designed under pressure and under load to bend back and forth. A screw is not. A screw will just snap in half. So wherever possible when I'm using framing, I want to try and do nails. So what I did was I took my drill, put a bit on, put it on the same size as the nail. Now if I was doing this and this wood was maybe borderline, it's a little bit brittle, it might split, it might not, I would probably go something just a tiny bit smaller than the nail, just to get a little bit of a pilot hole going, give me something to drive it through. In this case here, it seems like whenever I look at this, it's going to split on me. So I took a bit that's just a little bit bigger, and I drilled my pilot holes. And now we're just going to go back, now that we have our pilot holes, we'll do traditional framing. Done. So again, if I had to do a lot of walls, I wouldn't want to do them like this. In this case here, I'm just trying to get that one little section in. I'm stuck. I don't want to stop the job right now and put things on a standstill to go back to the store, get a refund on the old lot, probably go to a different store and get a different lot of wood. But for just getting me through this little process right here, finishing up that wall behind me, this is going to be more than sufficient. So we mark our crowns. Crowns always go to the back. Never fails.
Alright gang, as we wrap this video up, just a couple quick things. I do want to point out that I mentioned earlier in the video I would show you an example of the 3-4-5 on that wall. Didn't actually get to show that in the final cut. The footage that I had just really wasn't meshing well with everything else. But if you look at the bottom plates on my left leg there in that corner, I did use the 3-4-5 on the ground and everything turned out to be square. The other thing I did just want to point out is if you look right in front of my right leg there, that wiring in that box, that does look atrocious. I get that. I was just kind of mocking up wires, getting them out of the way, making sure they were there for roughing later. When I do the electric roughing, I make those nice and neat. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. As always, be safe and hit those like and subscribe buttons. I'll see you on the next one. I'll link our next video above.